Today's show is sponsored by Pricing Wire. Think about all the time, effort, uncertainty, and everything else you are investing into the software solution you're building. Pricing Wire has helped more than 1,000 software and technology innovators like you take a proactive approach to both discover and get paid what you're truly worth. From early startups to Fortune 500 enterprises, across verticals and around the globe, Pricing Wire delivers easy-to-understand and actionable recommendations to guide your monetization and pricing strategy. If you want to avoid unnecessary challenges or costly regrets and prevent missing time-sensitive revenue opportunities, Pricing Wire can help. Just go to pricingwire.com and book a strategy session today. Pricing Wire helps technology innovators like you design the right offerings, better quantify and message value, set and change prices, select the right pricing metrics, or even decide if usage-based pricing is best for you. Why wouldn't you want to achieve your revenue goals faster and with more confidence? Learn more at pricingwire.com and start making meaningful progress today.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are actually coming to you live from the massive, way down under Cloudcast studios. We are in Sydney, Australia this weekend, recording a little bit ahead of publishing the show because we're traveling for 2 weeks here in Asia, and being able to get good, reliable internet connectivity and a quiet place to record is sometimes tough when you're on the road and you're going to a different country every day. But enjoying my first visit down here to the land down under. People are incredibly nice. Got a chance to see Sydney, explore Sydney yesterday. Saw the Opera House, went and climbed the Sydney Harbour Bridge yesterday, walked around the city, had a lot of fun. But it was very, very interesting. Great to come down and see different parts of the world, get to meet people from around the world and kind of see how they're using the cloud. So not a lot of cloud news of the week this week. Actually, that's not totally true. There is always cloud news of the week. There's always things going on in the cloud. Pivotal had an event that was called Spring Cloud 1. Puppet had their event. I will put some things in the show notes. You can go take a look at those updates. They're kind of mostly incremental updates, a few sort of new product announcements. Nothing earth-shattering. No offense to either one of those companies, but just, again, we do those every week. It's that time of the year when we have those events. I thought it might be sort of interesting to do some regionally specific news. So kind of grabbed a cloud news of the week that is specific to Australia and specific to cloud computing. So announcement that went out earlier this week, 8th of October actually. Australian law enforcement and national security agencies are set to have greater access to data held by US-based cloud providers under an agreement being negotiated with the US government. So in essence, the Australian government and the US government are trying to put some agreements in place, sort of national laws or bilateral agreements in place that allow either one of those countries, and specifically sort of Australia, to be able to make claims for data for their customers, for their customers in Australia, partners of companies in Australia that are working with major U.S. based cloud providers. So their facilities don't have to be U.S. based, but this would include people like Amazon, AWS, Google Cloud, Azure Cloud. And when there are requests for that information, especially if, depending on where things are located, they're trying to come up with a way in which they can get that information, especially in lawful situations. This isn't just willy-nilly, hey, I want somebody else's data, but this is for lawful situations. And they're actually doing this under what they're calling the Cloud Act. So under the Clarifying Lawful Overseas Use of Data Act. So CLOUD Act, the Cloud Act. Again, is this super important to everybody? Well, it does get into some scenarios of trying to understand how are we adapting our laws, our ability to get information, ability to encrypt information in a world in which your data, you don't necessarily always know where the data is going to reside. You may be able to choose the data center in which you want to run your applications, but where the data resides as it moves downstream through an API or other types of things, you don't always know where that is. So kind of an interesting thing. Obviously, there is some pushback from the cloud providers because this gets into all sorts of privacy laws, all sorts of encryption laws, and things like that. But, I thought it would be sort of interesting, since we're down here in the land down under, to pull out some Australia-centric cloud news of the week. So I'm going to wrap it up with that, kind of keep it short and sweet this week. Again, this is the last week of about a 5-week travel of international travel for myself, 13 countries, 5 weeks. I've seen a lot of the world. So it's been great to get out and talk to a lot of different people about how they're using using the cloud. So with that, we're going to wrap it up. Have sort of an interesting conversation this week. We do get a chance to talk to some folks in the venture community from time to time. But this week's is a little different. We're not talking about sort of what the trends are. We're really talking about how are the venture community using their experience in various fields. And I think you're going to find this sort of interesting. Our conversation with Sarah, in terms of how they use their background in trying to make sense of markets that are very nascent, very limited in information. And it's sort of an interesting interview in terms of trying to apply similar techniques that are used in other non-technology centric fields to try and make sense of markets that are happening in the future and things that might be useful to you if you are in the business of trying to make sense of emerging markets or markets in which the data is not necessarily transparent for various reasons. So hope you enjoyed the interview. Today's episode of the Cloudcast is sponsored by Datadog, the monitoring platform for cloud scale infrastructure and applications. Datadog provides dashboarding, alerting, application performance monitoring, and log management in one tightly integrated platform, so you can get end-to-end visibility quickly. And it integrates seamlessly with AWS, so you can start monitoring EC2, RDS, ECS, and all your other AWS services in minutes. Visualize key metrics, set alerts to identify anomalies, and collaborate with your team to troubleshoot and fix issues fast. Sign up for a free trial today, and Datadog will send you a free t-shirt. Visit datadoghq.com/cloudcast to get started. That's datadoghq.com/cloudcast. And we're back. Folks, it's good to be back with you this week. One of the things that we always like to do, and we mix this throughout a lot of shows throughout the years, is obviously we get a chance to talk to a lot of startup companies. And we've always tried to, help folks understand, not only the technology that drives our ecosystem, but a lot of the economics and kind of a broader sense of how our ecosystem works from idea to inception to go to market and so forth. And one of the really exciting things that we get to do from time to time is we get to talk to some of the folks from the venture capital side of the world who get some very, very interesting insight, are able to bring their experience to helping us pick companies that may change the world, may change the technologies we have. So this week I'm very, very excited to bring on Sarah Catanzaro, who's a principal at Amplify Partners. Sarah, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Brian. Glad to be on the show.
Yeah, one of the things that we're very lucky to have on the show is a lot of times people will be presented to us, and different people who are friends of the show will say, "Hey, you should have so and so on. You should have so and so on. They'd be interesting." And when one of our friends had said you should have Sarah on the show, we said, "Okay, that's great. We always love people from the venture community." And when I started reading your bio, I was kind of blown away to a certain extent in terms of the depth of your background and the variety of your background in a very short period of time. So if you could just give us a little bit of your background, maybe prior to getting into the venture space and, some of the things that you've done in terms of, everything from getting out of school to getting to where you are today. I think it's a very interesting arc as to how you've brought some things together.
Absolutely. So I think I really have actually been solving the same problem for my entire career. It really comes down to understanding how covert organizations are going to behave when faced with an incumbent. But as you mentioned, I've really only been in venture for a little bit over 3 years now. So I started my career in the defense and intelligence sector. I entered college, shortly after 9/11. Timing is somewhat apropos, I guess. And I was just really fascinated by why do people commit acts of violence? How can we better understand what is motivating them and how these violent organizations are evolving? So my first job after graduating was really focused on actually applying computational methods to better understand adversary behavior. So some of those covert organizations ranged from Somali pirates to radical Islamic terrorists. And it was so interesting to see what we could do when we kind of introduced more objective modes of analysis. But having been at a think tank for a year and a half, I wanted to see how these technologies were actually applied. So I left this institute called the Center for Advanced Defense Studies to join a much larger defense contractor. And there I was working on projects to mine the dark web and better understand threat models and threat behavior. So here I was actually deployed to the Secret Service, and this was really interesting for various reasons. I mean, certainly being at the Secret Service was very exciting, but we kind of combined this idea of modeling threats with that of collecting information in more creative ways to solve really, really challenging problems. At the same time, I was doing this in the context of two very big bureaucracies, one multinational defense contractor, the other highly bureaucratic organization under DHS. And I kind of had more of the startup agile urge. So I left that role to join Palantir. At Palantir, I was working on state and local law enforcement projects. Again, really motivating to see just how much these organizations could achieve by leveraging new technologies. Working on things ranging from identifying kind of corrupt landowners to figuring out cigarette tax evasion schemes. I think at that point really had the startup bug, though, wanted to move out to the Bay Area. So joined a company called Mattermark, where in this case, the covert organization was no longer an adversary. It was in fact startups. So we were trying to figure out how can we collect information on startups that is going to be valuable to investors. And up until that point, it had been really more focused on statistical analysis, on symbolic programming. That was the dominant paradigm. But at Mattermark, I had the chance to work with and manage people ranging from ML developers to data scientists, data analysts. And so it was a great opportunity to just see how you build data products. And that remains something that's very exciting to me today. I did end up getting recruited by one of our customers, so that's how I kind of made my way to the dark side.
Yeah, no, it's sort of fascinating. And again, the side of it that was around covert stuff, just, for those of us that, read Tom Clancy novels and other things, that part is very interesting. But the other part that really kind of drew my attention was just this whole idea of, how do you start building models out of things where the information is not readily available. You're having to figure out signals from lots of other things, and in your case now it's applying it to figuring out what's going on with startups, what's going on with trends in the industry to figure out where do you make investments, where do you focus your time. I'm wondering if you could kind of help us just in a kind of broader picture sense. How do you start to think about building those models, when you're dealing with what feels like kind of a lack of readily available information, but you're trying to build data models, which obviously are very hungry for more and more information? What's the thought process that goes into that?
Really, really interesting question. And I think it can be largely broken down to data scientific and analytical methods and data management practices. And look, the analytical method will vary depending on the use case, depending on the types of information, the types of data that you have. So I'll focus a bit more on the data management challenge. So, first off, when I hear people say oh, we're not going to model that because we don't have data, I think that's kind of a lazy excuse. There are new and creative ways to collecting information. And when embarking on any project, you really need to think what are the sources of data that I have available to me, or what mechanisms can I use to generate more data. And so sometimes that is more mechanical, and sometimes it's interfacing with humans. So in the defense and intelligence sector, we have satellite communication data, we have machine generated data, but we still do rely very heavily on humans, human intelligence as well. once you've kind of scoped out what data sources are available to you, I'd say the next most important thing is just understanding those sources. And this I see just neglected too often. Whether a company is engaging in some new ML development product to build a recommender system, or if we're trying to figure out how a terrorist group will expand, you need to understand what bias might this data set contain. What are the limitations of it? How confident am I in this data set? And figure out how you can integrate these disparate sources so that you have the highest quality data. So really, I think understanding uncertain information sources, modeling these types of data sets, the most important thing is just better understanding the limitations of the data, better understanding the data quality. Once you have kind of that thoughtful, careful understanding of the data quality, then you can pick the right analytical method and you can do the rest of the model building in a much more nuanced and prudent way.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I'm always a little bit fascinated by the venture side of the industry because there's so much uncertainty. There's a lot of potential risk, but there's, having been around the industry for a long time, you're also dealing with kind of a lot of characters, a lot of personalities. You're trying to figure out, what's real, what's not real. How have you been able to use maybe some of your background, whether it's in counterintelligence or in human intelligence and so forth, to sort through not just what's going on in the marketplace, but how do you figure out if it's the right person, the right team to make an investment in? Is that something that you've been able to leverage from previous work into the things that you do today?
It's funny. My first reaction is that what I learned from the defense and intelligence sector is be paranoid. If you've ever met with other people who are coming out of this industry, we are all ridiculously paranoid. And any fact that is presented to us, again, we're always making these kind of judgments, can I trust this assertion? What is my confidence in the facts that I had? Frankly, I do think some of that paranoia is helpful in venture, just understanding that the facts that are presented to you may not in fact be objectively true. But a lot of the work that I did was better understanding how terrorist organizations evolve. So there's a certain amount of it that happens on the individual level, assessing one's character, assessing what motivates them. But terrorist organizations, they're really affected by these kind of complexity dynamics. So I find that in venture, where my background in counterterrorism, counterinsurgency is most helpful, is really just predicting how organizations will evolve, predicting how they will respond to potential competitors, even predicting how effectively they'll be able to recruit and motivate people to work behind a mission. So it's much more kind of the team and organizational dynamic than it is profiling or interrogating a founder.
Yeah. Well, and especially in early stage companies, those first few hires that you make are incredibly important because the team is so limited. So the dynamics are complicated. And then obviously, growth is a hard thing to do, and growth can go in a lot of different directions. So yeah, having that background, whether it was, for certain situations, I can see it where it could become, very applicable, or at least, useful things that you can provide guidance, to the teams that you work with, and that you're providing them insight on. I want to shift gears a little bit away from, kind of some of the modeling to one of your focus areas is around what you call machine intelligence. And I was interested in the kind of terminology around calling something machine intelligence. First off, I guess, what's the difference between, say, machine intelligence and when things get lumped together as artificial intelligence and machine learning. And then I'll ask kind of a follow-up, but I'm curious if the language and the wording is there for a specific reason.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I would say that I distinguish between machine intelligence and machine learning in a very concrete way. Machine learning is a methodology. There are other data scientific, other analytical methods that can be applied to mimic human intelligence or to create machines that are able to perceive, reason, and act in the world that are not machine learning. So in my point of view, like machine learning is just a subset of machine intelligence. One of the reasons that I prefer the term machine intelligence is I think it kind of better captures the difference between humans and machines. So there are some tasks that humans do very well in terms of analytical thinking, in terms of creative applications. And there are other things that machines do very well, kind of routine tasks that can be automated and automated quickly, doing things at scale, at speed. And I don't think the best approach to developing this field is to emulate humans. We should kind of recognize the difference between what machines are good at and what humans are good at, and use machines to complement humans, but not necessarily in a like biomimetic way. So that's why I tend to lean more towards machine intelligence versus artificial intelligence, which somewhat implies that we are faking human intelligence, that we are trying to recreate the human mind in a computer.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. So in that vein, we do get a chance to talk to a number of people who, claim to have some background or working on some things in the AI, ML, machine intelligence space. Given your background as to having actually built a number of these systems, and now you're, investing in companies that are, furthering this, what are some of the technology areas or problem spaces that you find, still very interesting, or, lots of opportunity for either growth or evolution in this space?
Absolutely. So I spend a lot of time actually thinking about machine intelligence and data management tools. I'd say one major thing has changed or is changing in the past 3 years since I left an operational role. So back then, there were a lot of enterprises that had collected and were storing very large data sets. And they were motivated to do something with all of that data that they had collected and stored, but they didn't really know what to do with it. So I'd have a lot of companies that would come to me for advice, and they'd say something like, okay, like we've got big data, we want to like sprinkle that magical AI fairy dust on it and make something wonderful. And this was the wrong approach. And I think in that 3-year time period, we have gotten much better at identifying important business problems that can be solved with machine intelligence. And that's a really, really critical step. But now we're kind of hitting 2 other problems. So for the organizations that are kind of less mature in their data science journey, I think many of them are realizing that their next step was to go and hire a bunch of machine learning researchers. But upon trying to build models, those researchers realized that they didn't actually have the data that they needed to build models. And so part of the issue is that the tools to actually discover data, to improve data quality, those haven't matured yet. And so I'm really excited about this domain, things that come upstream of model building, things that will enable you to do robust machine learning, but that are really more in the domain of data management. I think some of the more kind of mature data science orgs have built their own internal tools. They figured out these data management problems. Now where they're having a problem is really scoping machine intelligence projects. So given the way that ML development typically happens, kind of the cost and time associated with training, operationalization, it's hard to tell, like, is something going to take a month or 6 months? Is it going to work? Like, how confident are we that 6 months of investment are going to yield anything? And so the best way to kind of solve that problem is through a more agile development cycle, through kind of tighter iteration. But there aren't great tools to enable tighter iteration in the ML space. So I think, again, a new set of platforms is emerging that will really enable more agile ML development and also just make it more robust when you put it into production. Like the horror stories of things breaking that I hear all the time, they're just mind-boggling, even at some of the biggest tech companies with the largest ML teams. So there, the focus really has to be, again, on iterating faster, but ensuring that the things that are operationalized are stable, are fair, and secure.
Yeah. So I think if I'm hearing you right, it's, several years ago it was, we have lots of data. We're not really sure what to do with it, but, we've heard that there's these sort of magical technologies that'll, find a needle in a haystack. We'll figure out, what's the next right product. That sort of led to, more awareness at a business level of, how do we actually use these things? How do we apply them to a specific problem set, a specific domain of the business, which obviously is a good thing. We've gone from, kind of, like you said, fairy dust and promises to, okay, there's distinct problems to solve. And now we're going through a little bit of inflated expectations of, okay, now that, our competitor solved something, somebody at a conference or a neighbor told them about a thing they did, there's now this expectation of like, okay, well, I want it solved in 3 weeks or 6 months or something. And we don't really know how to scope, our exuberance for what's now possible. And then we've also, obviously, like you said, in order to mitigate that, you've got to have better tooling that allows more iterative experimentation, more iterative, environments to be built up, to be torn down, to be scaled out. It's interesting to watch this evolution of how the problem has gone from, kind of pie in the sky to, very distinct thing, which is a good evolution of the market.
Yeah, no, I think this evolution is very positive, and I think you articulated that beautifully. Now the big challenge that we face is like, okay, we figured out when to use ML. Let's make it work. And to get it to work, we need better tools. Those tools will be a combination of model deployment, model operationalization things, as well as just better data management tools. I kind of alluded to the data quality problem in defense and intelligence, and frankly, it's one that plagues so many companies today as they try to really build robust ML products.
Yeah. Are there any kind of specific technologies, or maybe even the companies behind them, that you're kind of bullish about, in this helping to evolve it? Is there a couple that you've got your eye on in terms of, what might be the thing that helps better manage the data, better manage the agility?
We had just talked about, my paranoia and my as a spook. I'm not going to go and reveal my trade secrets, but
Sure.
I think the types of companies, the types of teams that I'm most excited about are those that combine really strong, rigorous engineering practices and backgrounds with ML backgrounds. And so in some cases, this actually means applying machine intelligence to data infrastructure, using ML for query optimization or data cleaning. In some cases, it's better engineering practices for ML, creating CI/CD systems or version control. So really, it's kind of this intersection of systems, data management, and machine intelligence, that is the most exciting opportunity ground for me.
Yeah, no, that's great. And again, I totally respect not wanting to give away all the details and so forth. It's like you said, we live in a business of lots and lots of data, but sometimes some of the data is far more important than other data.
Yeah, exactly.
I want to ask you one last question, and I hope you take this the right way. The venture industry is a little bit heavily weighted towards men. I think that's maybe an understatement. You have been in the space for a few years, but you're doing extremely well. You're at the partner level at Amplify. If there are other women out there that are listening, they love technology, but they're also curious about the business side of things, or they're curious about venture. Is there any guidance that you give? Do you mentor other women and kind of share some of your experiences, or are there some things that you've sort of found that have helped make you successful in a world that you're a little bit of the lesser at the board table?
By all means. So I wish I could sit here and say, like, it is easy to be a woman in venture capital. One of the things that actually amazes me is I find that it was easiest to be a woman in the defense sector. I think, a lot of that, though, has to do with the discipline and structure that characterizes that industry. That said, one of the most important kind of assets that I have is a peer group of women in venture capital. Things can get tough. Venture also tends to be more of an individual contributor sport. So just having people who I can vent to, talk to, troubleshoot with, like that to me is just entirely invaluable. So as a woman in venture, I think just establishing a really, really strong peer group is perhaps the most important thing. Now, what's interesting too is that, like, I've gotten advice from various people to either like avoid the third rail, like don't talk about being a woman in tech, or really like trump it up, make sure that you tell people you're not going to be the only woman on the panel, blah, blah, blah. And frankly, I don't think there's any right tact. It sounds so kind of cliche, but I think the most important thing in venture is to like be yourself. People, especially in Silicon Valley, they can kind of see through in authenticity. So knowing what you value and living and expressing those values, especially as a woman, I think is really, really key.
Yeah, no, it's great advice. It's it is sort of unfortunate that sometimes it gets painted as you either need to be Sheryl Sandberg, all lean in, or be a wallflower, and obviously when you bring a bunch of really interesting background, when you bring a bunch of creativity, when you bring kind of diverse experience, there is so much more. But you're right, it is. And I think this is important kind of for any part of our industry, having that network of people that you can lean on, that you can confide in, that you can go to when you have tough days, I think is incredibly important because, for better or for worse, our industry is somewhat volatile. It does go through ups and downs, and you've got to have people that you can lean on and leverage their experience. So I think that's great advice. Sarah, thank you so much for the time today. We really, really appreciate it. We loved kind of getting your insight, and it's always interesting. We talk to a number of folks in venture who will say, well, I started a company and then I got into it. I think it's always interesting to find people that have a diverse background in terms of the things they've done and how they're bringing really different thinking to the space that we're in today. So again, thank you so much for the time. Folks, before we wrap that up, I want to thank our sponsors today, both DigitalOcean and PricingWire. Folks, it's easy to learn more about PricingWire and look at a strategy session with them at pricingwire.com. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up. I want to thank Sarah, and for myself and Aaron, as always, thanks for telling telling a friend. Thanks for sharing the show with everybody. Thanks for rating it and helping us grow the show. And with that, we're going to wrap it up, and we will talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.